Hey budget gardeners, Vita Loca here. Join me today as we plant a bunch of Astilbe as well as some Heuchera. So let's go. We are on the west side of my house, which is basically my front yard. And as you come up the driveway, you are greeted by a large flower bed that I recently redid. In this flower bed right here, there are a bunch of things. We have a hydrangea, and I recently limbed it up, and then I also underplanted it with a bunch of shade-loving plants. I'll put a link to that video down in the description below in case you're interested in watching the transformation of that bed. But right next to that flower bed is a blank space. And I want to actually take you in for a closer look and kind of show you what I'm planning to do. So right next to the bed that we recently worked on, there is a tree, and I've experimented with a number of things over the years around that tree. I started with hosta. The deer loved the hosta, so I removed the hosta. I put some creeping phlox there. I thought it would look very pretty. Guess what? It's too shady. I can't do creeping phlox around there. So what I'm planning to do is just put a bunch of the same heuchera that is under this hydrangea. And in the video where I redid this bed, I showed you in my backyard a very weedy part of my yard where this heuchera lived. And we dug up some of that heuchera, and I just went this morning and dug up more of that same heuchera. So I'm going to be planting it all around this tree. And gardening is experimenting. We're going to see how the heuchera does down here in this area of my yard. In this area over here, I experimented and planted hosta a few years ago. Well, the deer loved the hosta. They thought it was a buffet for them. So a few weeks ago, I removed the hosta. I'm going to try Astilbe. I received a bunch of Astilbe recently as part of a plant haul, and I got it for free from a nice lady that was thinning out her gardens. And I then took that Astilbe and I potted it up. And I showed you in a video, not only the plant haul, but I also showed you in a different video how to divide Astilbe. So you can see right here, this is just some of the Astilbe that I have. I'll put up on the screen how many total pieces of Astilbe I was able to divide into individual pieces. But there is quite a few. They're all the same color. So part of today's planting project is to remove any foliage that looks bad. But we're going to keep any foliage that still looks good. And for right now, I do want to keep the spent blossoms on there because they are providing some interest in this bed. And I think it would look really pretty just to leave the blossoms on there. In this bucket here, this is a bunch of that heuchera that I dug up from backyard. Another part of this project is to remove this rhododendron. I have found that when it comes to small leaf rhododendrons, they prefer to get more sun than what this rhododendron is getting. It's been here for a number of years, and even though it stays alive, it does not bloom for me. So I'm going to be digging that up and just putting it in a pot for right now, and I'm going to think hard about where I want to put that in my yard. And then the final part of this project is to add a layer of mulch. There is already drip irrigation in this bed. Mr. Budget Gardener helped me last year, and we added drip to this bed, which is really nice because Astilbe needs a lot of water. The good news about rhododendrons is that they have a very shallow root system. However, I'm trying to be a little careful with my digging because I know that I have irrigation lines in here. I always thought that rhododendrons need a lot of shade. But what I've learned over time with this small leaf rhododendron is that it actually needs more sun than I'm giving it. And I'm not quite sure where I want to put this yet, which is why I'm just going to put it in a bucket, put a little bit of dirt with it, and then I'm going to think a little bit about where I want to put this. So if you have a small leaf rhododendron that's not thriving, think hard about how much sun it's getting. And if I can dig this out, then so can you. It has a good root system, but again, it's very small, very shallow, which makes it really nice for digging. I'll end up putting this in a actual large pot with some dirt, and I'll water it afterwards. Next up in this project is to give these heuchera a try around this tree, and hopefully they'll be happy here. I'm going to start just by cleaning up the base of it. There are some really, really pretty flashier heuchera that are out there, but I really like to reuse things. I like to recycle plants, pots, dirt, you name it. Doing so allows me to keep my budget low when it comes to gardening, because gardening can get very expensive fast. One thing I'd like to do over time with possibly this heuchera, as well as the heuchera that I just underplanted beneath my hydrangea, is to incorporate maybe one other color of heuchera that I, can divide somewhere else from my yard. But I don't even want to bother with that until I know that this heuchera will do well and look nice in this area where I'm going to plant it. In terms of that weedy area in my backyard, well, part of the goal is for me to empty out those beds, and I want to start over because I'm not happy with them. So part of starting over is digging out plants and rehoming them, which is what we're doing with these heuchera, for example. I'm just looking if there's an area where I can divide this just by pulling it apart. And there was, which makes it nice and easy. I want to stay as close to the irrigation line as I can, but I also want to be close to the tree. But I think what I'm going to do is when it comes to planting, I'll plant it somewhere like right here. And that way it's still getting plenty of water, which it's going to need because this is a very dry area, as it should be because it's near that tree. But I don't want to be any closer to the tree because it gets drier as I go in that direction. And I think what will happen over time with this heuchera, because it does spread fast, is it may spread that way over time. But once it's established, I think it'll be fine over there. But as it's a brand new planting, I want it to be getting water daily. And since I have a lot of this heuchera still left in my backyard, and I have it in my backyard plant nursery, I can always go shopping for more if I need to. I'd rather have a bigger plant so that it makes a little bit of an impact for this year. I like to expose the irrigation as I work because I just want to make sure I'm planting as close to that irrigation line as possible, because I can tell you the ground is very dry in areas near here where there isn't irrigation. I have other color of heuchera in my yard. I have, like, for example, a pistachio green color, chartreuse green, and I also have a caramel colored one. I think they both would look really pretty in this area. So next year, if these do well here, I can always add one of those two around with these heuchera just to make these ones pop more. Well, I finished planting around this tree. And one thing I want to mention is the irrigation definitely doesn't go fully around the tree. So I'm going to have to hand water this until we're out of a drought, because we haven't had a lot of rain and it's been very hot. And that's okay. But I know that my sister-in-law has the same heuchera in her yard, and she has it in an area where it gets a lot of sun and there's no irrigation set up, and the heuchera does just fine. And ultimately, I do want plants to be able to survive in my yard. I don't want every single plant hooked up to irrigation. So I'm happy with how this came out, and I have an idea. Let me share it with you. So there's the tree right there that we just worked on. And right over here is where the Astilbe is going to go. But I was thinking, why not add the same heuchera around this tree? Let me show you another angle. Okay, so here's a different angle. There's the heuchera around that tree. And as we work our way this way, there's the other tree. And I know there's another tree next to it, but we're just going to focus on this tree. I'm going to go ahead and add that same heuchera around this tree. And I think that that would look very sweet, just to kind of tie in this area with similar plantings. So let me get busy and work on that. Okay, all the heuchera has been planted. So this is the first tree. And then as we make our way in this direction, I got it planted around this tree. It's a little bit more sparse around this tree because I did run out, which is actually a good thing. I was able to dig it up from the backyard. It's all been dug. And then I went to my backyard plant nursery and I borrowed a few plants from there. Next up are the Astilbe. And I have more of these, but I'm going to take you in for a closer look and show you my process for just cleaning them up a little bit and then getting one of them planted. So what I'm doing is I'm just going through each plant and I'm just going to cut back any of the foliage that doesn't look very good. This one here did look healthy, but you can see it's flopping right over, so I'm just going to cut that back as well. And as long as I leave a few leaves on each plant, that's enough to feed the roots and get the plant to grow bigger and healthier. In this bed, there are 2 irrigation lines, and I wanted to expose them just so I can plant near them. So when it comes to the Astilbe, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to plant on this side as well as on this side. And that way, on this side, I can do, if I want to, plant some annuals on the front side there. So let's go ahead and get one of these planted. And I've mentioned in previous videos that I like to reuse containers, that this is not a Proven Winners plant. It's just a container that I got from a local nursery where you can recycle pots. So a lot of people drop off pots there. And the good news is each container, along with the Astilbe, has some dirt with it. But this soil in this area is pretty good. We added composted horse manure here years ago, as well as some of our own compost. And there aren't a ton of roots on this specific plant, but that's okay. It will take right off once it's in the ground. It's going to take me a while, but I'm going to clean up all the Astilbe plants and get them planted along both areas of this irrigation line. I like to give you little glimpses in time on how this project is looking. I did a pretty good job in cutting off any dead looking growth that was on the Astilbe, just some crispy leaves. And I kept behind the old spent blossoms because they still look pretty, and also just any of the green leaves that still look good. I'm really enjoying this little pocket of my yard. I think as we work on flower beds, it motivates us to just keep on going. And you know, these Astilbe I got for free from a really nice lady. And I want to make sure I take good care of them. I don't want to lose them over the winter. So I had thought about adding more Astilbe towards the center, but honestly, I think by the time I add mulch, this area will be pretty full looking. So why go overboard? I think I still have 2 more trays of Astilbe left, but I can use that somewhere else in my yard. It wasn't the original scope of this project, but now what I'd like to do is just tuck in some annuals towards the front here. So let's go shopping for some plants in my yard. I've shown you recently all of these plants that still need to be put in the ground or put into pots. We're going to look down here because there's something very pretty. And these are wax begonias. I collected the seeds last year and I started these indoors during the winter months. I think these would look really pretty in that area. And I'm going to bring down all that I have and we'll see how many I use. But I'm not going to skimp at this time of year. I want to jam pack that area. And if that means we use most of these begonias, then that's a good thing. Even though these 6 cell packs were originally filled with plants, there were losses along the way. And that happens when you start plants from seed. Sometimes you lose plants, and because these have been neglected for a while, it was bound to happen. But we still have plenty of plants to play with. And we have plenty of room for these plants where they're going to be much happier. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get these all planted in here. I'm going to mulch this area, and I'm going to show you how everything looks when I'm all done. It is always such a great feeling when you get plants in the ground. It doesn't matter what time of year it is, plants are always happier in the ground than in a pot. Remember my motto, one flower bed at a time? That's my goal for this year. And that flower bed we tackled yesterday. And then today I was on the fence. I wasn't sure about what to do in this space, but I knew I wanted to work on it today. And I'm glad I did. I think it came out really nice. And we'll see over time how these plants like this space. But I'm glad I used up all the heuchera that was in my weedy part of my backyard, because now I can keep pulling other plants out of that area and eventually weed that area. And the annuals look very sweet towards the front. Those are the wax begonias. And the Astilbe should do well here. It's definitely a pretty shady part of my yard. They're on drip. And let's see if the deer leave them alone. The deer don't eat the Astilbe in my backyard, so I'm hopeful they won't touch these. But we'll find out. I think it's a good choice to have these heuchera around this tree. I love putting things around my trees. I don't know why, but I really do. I planted a ton of impatiens and a ton of begonias from seed for the specific reason that I wanted to get them in pots as well as in my landscape. So they are finally making their way into the landscape, which is very exciting. And even though I still have about 2 trays or 20 pots of the Astilbe, those can get planted elsewhere in my garden. But I think these will make a nice impact in this area over time. I have to tell you, making these videos has really been inspiring for me, because it gets my creative juices flowing, and I want to be able to share with you my thought process, what's going on in my head when I come up with ideas for my garden. And I'm hoping that it motivates you or inspires you in some way to think outside of the box, or to feel like even though it's middle of July, it's still not too late to make changes to our gardens or to plant those annuals that you never got planted out of their pots. I'm on to my next bed after this one, and I really hope you'll join me on this journey that I have this year with basically taking my flower beds and trying to bring them back to life. And I'd love to hear from you and know how you're doing this year with your gardens. Please feel free to drop a comment down in the comment section below. And until the next video, make it a great day with gardening.